Okay, so today we're going to be looking at an older video from the same source as what I've been using, and this time it's what it's like being a foreigner in China. Now, the reason I picked this one out is it's an older, like I said, it's an older video. It's actually the video was released in September of 2018, which means presumably the interviews you're about to see were recorded in the months before that. Well, that's the same time frame when I returned to the country. I arrived in, I believe, March of 2018, so about 6 months before this. And it's going to be interesting because I want to see if their experiences reflect mine. Because as far as I'm concerned, I landed in that country in party time. Like it was, it 2008 had been awful, and 2018 was amazing. Uh, Again, the country had been a lot harder to get into. The supply of foreign teachers, which was already low to begin with, it was already insufficient, had plummeted. So pay rates were up because there was this push for more professional teachers, and so like my pay at the place I worked was triple what I'd been making in 2008. Better working conditions, all around. I wasn't getting called in to get dressed down once every week or so like I was before, because again they couldn't afford to lose us. And no major international incidents, so people were kind of getting along. It was just a really really great time to be there. So this is kind of a snapshot in time of when I first kind of arrived proper, and it'll be interesting to see if they think the same thing or if I'm a bit of a weirdo here. So let's begin now. I should mention this first. I kind of figured they'd do this in Shanghai because they usually do. The places I've lived have been much smaller cities with much smaller foreign born populations, but Shanghai is not as diverse as people think it is anyway. I don't remember what the number I cited in Crisis of Harmony was. By the way, watch that if you haven't. But I want to say it's only about 5 to 10% foreign born, which for a city of that size is really low compared to like New York, London, LA, much, much higher. Continuing. Lots of Russians in China. So it's pretty diverse group, which at the time is what you saw. It's going to be interesting when I finally get back to see how that's changed because they've really cracked down on who they let into the country. At the time, I had tons of Russian and Ukrainian coworkers, lots of Filipinos. It's going to be interesting to see if there are any Filipinos in this video. I'm guessing probably not because I think they go to the smaller cities as well. But these days, it would not be nearly as easy, simply because they've really cracked down on the foreign specialist, foreign expert thing. It is not nearly as easy to get in if you want to be a teacher, which of course is what a lot of people do. Continuing. So 18 years, which means he would have first in 2000, so 1999. That's before I arrived. Uh, One thing I'll say is it depends so much on where you live. The very first place I lived was a city called Changchun. It was way up in the northeast part of the country, in the like the historical Manchu territories, and that part of the country is actually really low development. I don't know what it's like now because I haven't been there in 15 years, but at the time I had no frame of reference. I was 22. I'd never been out of the country before, let alone seen a lot of this one, a lot of China, I should say. So I really wasn't aware of how weird that experience was or how different it was in that part of the country. So it definitely depends on where you are. Foreigners tend to be pushed into the higher development areas. Like we're not all over the place. You take three major cities rather in the south: Shanghai, Nanjing, and Shenzhen. Uh, Draw those into a triangle, and then from the points of that triangle, draw a line up to Beijing, and that's where all the foreigners live. 80-90% of us. So being way up in those like historical Manchu territory was really weird. But at the time, I was working for a company that was far, far, far larger than all the others, so they actually had a lot of uh, places. They had a lot of schools in those kind of areas. So it was a much different experience. Your experience of China is going to differ dramatically based on where you live, but 90% of people live in the same places, so they have similar experiences. Continuing. That's definitely one of the big things that was changing there at the time was WePay and Alipay. I'm not going to go into detail because I feel like American journalists are all just really so mystified by this, and there have been so many articles written about it. Some of them go way over the line, like, "Oh, you can't pay for cash anywhere." Of course you can. Of course you can. But that is, by the time I got back, was very much the standard way to pay, which had not existed. The last time I had been in the country before that was 2011. So that was time for a lot of things to change. And yeah, WePay and Alipay, the touchless pay systems, which technically exist in the US, are a huge deal in China. Continuing. Mm-hmm. So several things we've kind of skipped by there because they're all little things, and I wanted to kind of get them into a bundle and talk about them all at once. Food that makes you sick. Absolutely. Now, I didn't have too much of a problem with that, and frankly, I ate in sketchy ass places too. But a bigger issue is the stuff you don't notice. Uh, in I think 2011, like right before I left, there was a big scandal about them using recycled oil, which contained nephrotoxins. So it wouldn't make you sick right away, but if you ate it over a period of years, eventually your organs would start to shut down. So that was a really big scandal. Toilet paper. I have never been a brand snob, but in China, you find a brand of toilet paper you like, you stick with it, and that is absolutely critical. It's a little thing, but yeah. Now, I think the idea of not being able to find Western food, especially because they're in Shanghai, strikes me as really weird. Been, I was in Shanghai briefly for a few months, and the range of food you can find there is pretty extensive, especially compared to the rest of the country. It is harder, depending on where you live, to find specific cuisines, especially compared to like Korea and in the ROK. There's a much wider range of foreign food because it's more, again, kind of more westernized, Americanized compared to China. But these days, unless you're in the middle of nowhere, you can probably find some of these things. Bread is not that hard to find. Now, real butter, if you care about that, that's extremely hard to find. So if you like butter, then get used to margarine. Continuing. Whoa. That's a weird story. And rather than try to explain it, because I don't know what was going on with this, I will tell you a different weird story that may be related. There's a park near where I used to live, and sometimes I just go there and sit on the bench as you do. And one time while I was doing this, this guy came up. He tried to speak to me in English, which he clearly did not understand. And then I swear he grabbed my arm and like was feeling my arm hair, and it was weird. And I chased him off as you do when someone just comes up and starts touching you. But one of the things I've kind of grown to suspect based on my interactions is that particular park might have been a hookup spot for gay men. And this may have been him trying to figure out if I was gay. Don't know if that's true. I just had some weird interactions in that park that kind of suggest that some of these dudes were trying to pick me up. But that's a topic for a completely different video. We're not going to get into the like LGBT issues in China. Now I could probably talk about it elsewhere, but let's just keep this moving forward. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they watch a lot of international television. In China, they have all these bootleg sites for it. As I'm recording this, the big deal news is the death of Matthew Perry, which is a huge deal over there. Like my WeChat memories are blowing up with people with like teary goodbyes because you have no idea how big a deal the TV show Friends is in that country. I know there are people who obsess over it here, but in China, that show has been used as an English language learning tool for a long time. People are obsessed with it. So, yeah, you need to realize that one thing that actually helps is if you're going to China, find out what American TV shows and movies are currently popular there, because that can give you some idea of what stereotypes they're working off of. Continuing. Mm. Another funny story about that. This is actually older. This is back in 2008. There was this awful bar where the foreigners would like to go. It's called the Mayflower. It's a nice place. It's big. They have live music, but frankly, it was where the foreigners went to find prostitutes. So I didn't go there much. I only went there twice, and many of my coworkers basically lived there. And there was this one woman. Because back then there weren't a lot of female teachers. This girl was also like our senior employee, and she'd been there I think less than 2 years, which tells you how quickly people were trying to get out. But she was at the Mayflower probably 4 or 5 nights a week, just getting trashed. And apparently she was in an advertisement for that because she just lived there. And that's kind of the end of that story. I could use this as a segue into how people go to China and become drunks if they're not careful. But I have a feeling there's maybe a 30% chance of that coming up, so we'll just keep going. This would, of course, be different now. Okay, here we go. Okay, before we even start, I actually want to preempt this. Yeah, the internet's censored. Not a shocker. All of you know this. So let's talk about VPNs briefly. Because obviously I used one. I didn't use one when I was first over there. I used open proxies, which is a terrible idea. I don't even know if they still exist. They're a horrible security issue. But if you're using a VPN, the trick to it is the Chinese government knows about them. There's this myth in the Western press that, oh, it's this dinosaur government and they don't know people are getting around the system. They know about VPNs. Of course they know about VPNs. The issue is, though, they're selective in which ones they block. At the time they were recording these interviews, there was talk about there being zones in cities where a lot of foreigners lived where they kind of exempted them from the censorship. But their kind of alternative is they just pretend not to notice the VPNs that foreigners use. Because here's the thing, most of the VPNs that we use, and I'm blanking on which one I was using at the time exactly. It wasn't one of the ones you've seen advertised all over YouTube. I remember that much. It was relatively expensive. It's one of the more expensive ones on the consumer end. And the expensive ones tend to be the ones they let through. They kind of just pretend not to notice them because those are the ones the foreigners use. The cheaper and the free ones especially get blocked all the time because those are the ones the locals use. And that's kind of the deal they've made with us. But even then, even using a VPN that was rarely blocked, it still got blocked sometimes. If there's a situation, like they were getting to, when I was there, the anniversary of Tiananmen. And when that happened, there was a real crackdown for about 2 days. And during that time, my VPN stopped working, which was not a coincidence. They knew about it. Listen to me, New York Times, CNN, they know about the VPNs. They're letting them go through as a deal to us, but sometimes that deal breaks down. Continuing. Okay, I mentioned that in the last video I did about Korea. China, the Chinese government, if you're a foreigner in that country, the government is constantly trying to push you out. And that is why people there don't tend to stay there as long. You may notice, we did have the one guy who'd been there 12 years. I have known people who've been there that long. They're mostly business owners. But most people are there for a few years and then they're out, tops. Because it is really hard to stay. whatever they say, the Chinese government does not want. They're trying to keep the foreign-born population low, and so every single year they're just trying to push you out the door. And after a while, it gets really, really hard to stay. Now, the upside is because it's hard to stay, that's one more thing that makes the people who do stay more valuable. So, again, it used to be it was really easy to get in. Now it's hard to get in and stay, but there are dividends to be paid if you do stay. Continuing. Mm-hmm. That's weird. It's usually worse during the winter. That's questionable. When I was over there in 2008 to 11, there was a lot of foreign culture being infused into China, and they did not like it. There were actually government efforts. One of the big ones at the time was Christmas. They've started to celebrate Christmas as a secular holiday, and the Chinese government did not like it. They've been trying to kind of protect their culture, and you get this every now and then. Some of the crackdowns I mentioned when I was talking about video games are related to this. They are trying to keep that infusion of foreign culture to a minimum, and that is something it's been an ongoing problem. It's been an ongoing concern, something for them, something they've been doing, but it's definitely more severe at certain times than others. And I don't feel it was all that bad in 2018. So I really disagree with this. Continuing. Didn't happen. Mm-mm. So I don't think that the foreigner's discount really exists in China the same way it does in Japan. But if unless you're buying things in like street markets, in which case all bets are off. By the way, haggling happens a lot. It's a big deal in China, even in you see it a lot in like produce stands. I've occasionally been behind like an old guy or an old lady who would just start to angrily scream, just scream at the whoever was working the counter, just trying to get the price down. So that's a big deal. I've seen fights break out. Not saying it's common. I'm saying it's happened. I saw the worst one I ever saw. It was two ladies were fighting. I don't know what it was over, but one of them was on the ground and the other one was kicking and stomping her. So it was a pretty brutal. It was pretty damn savage attack for I don't know socks, whatever it was over. Continuing. Before we move on, I want to say about that other. I mean, okay, I was scammed in Beijing, as everyone is. But honestly, in terms of a lot of the kind of con jobs that are very common in China, they don't really doom to foreigners that much. There's a lot of people jumping in front of vehicles. Once, one of the places I worked, someone came in and just started screaming in our lobby and said he'd go away if we paid him. Things like that tend to happen to the locals. They don't really do them to foreigners. Foreigners, you're gonna be sold something fake, or someone might pick your pocket, which I've been told was common, but it never happened to me. So honestly, as long as you're not in the big touristy areas of Beijing or Shanghai, which again, this is in Shanghai, so they probably deal with more of it than I ever had to, you're probably not going to encounter this kind of things too much. Continuing. Mm. White monkeys. Wait for you to use the word. I disagree. Uh, so the reason that foreigners are so valued in this country is because they are so rare. At the time this was being recorded, the foreign-born population, they hadn't done the census yet, but I was in the country for the census in 2020, and at the time, I believe they said the foreign-born population was somewhere between 850 and 900,000 in the whole country. And that's the reason that you do get what they were talking about earlier about it being really easy to find work is what they call white monkey jobs. And this is another thing the Chinese government's kind of been trying to crack down on because it makes them look really bad. It makes the country look really bad. Is they will just pay foreigners for the dumbest things, sometimes just to hang out. I never actually did this kind of work, but I've occasionally done these things as favors. I once posed as a for a girlfriend. I posed as a foreign design expert. There was this guy I knew. I pretended to work at a school he ran. So this kind of thing is a big deal, and it's not an economic thing. It's because we're rare. We are really, really rare in that country, and it makes us intrinsically valuable, but only in the same sense. It does mean you are very objectified, which in the short term is kind of okay. In the long term, it does eventually become a problem because people assume they know things about you because you're a foreigner or an American. It's a lot of stereotypes. Let's just keep this going. Yep. Mm-hmm. All the time. Yeah, several times that happened to me. Um, in fact, this is one of my favorite stories. I was once on a walk with a young lady, and I was telling her the story about how I'd been in the city of Suzhou, and I'd been at this temple, and it was a historically significant temple, so it was a pretty significant tourist site for locals, but like none of the foreign guides talked about. I heard about it from one of my coworkers, like my handler at the place I was working, and this family came up to us, and or the father did, and he had a camera, and I thought he wanted me to take a picture of them, but no, he wanted to take a picture of me with his wife and kid. And as I'm explaining this to the girl I'm with, exactly as I'm finishing the story, an old guy comes up to her and talks to her, and she says he wants me to take a picture of the two of you. Uh, I have much less funny stories about people wanting about traveling and getting bogged down in regulations and having to waste a whole day, and then having some random guy want to take a picture with me and just wanting to tell him to go to hell. So it's not always charming. It can be a funny story unless you've been having a shitty time. Then it's a shitty situation. Continuing. Mm-hmm. All right. Okay. So overall, there are a few people in there I disagreed with. I think a lot of that comes from the fact that they live in Shanghai, which, from the limited amount of time I've spent there, is a very different environment. But overall, that's about what I expected. 2018 was a fantastic time to live there, and it's kind of a shame that more people can't experience what it was like to go there during kind of the golden age of expat life in China, because I have a feeling it's gone. Um, I really don't think that either. I mean, I'm sure that the pay is still going to be really good when I'm back in the working conditions, but I think the social life is probably going to be dead in the ground just because, again, so much has changed. Not as many people there. People in particular have been abandoning Shanghai during the pandemic. Every time it closed down, it opened up, more people left. So my understanding is Shanghai is not such a lively place for foreigners anymore. To some extent, it's still a major world city, obviously. But yeah, overall, that was about what I expected from that time period. Very much lines up with my own experiences. And thank you for sharing this with me. If you are interested in hearing more of my stories and my insight, as it were, or eventually I will get out of here, and then you can see what China is like in 2023 and 24. I hope you will subscribe, and I will see you later.